We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 69a. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said that if a person sells a field, included in that sale are the avonim that are litzarcha, that serve that field, that are used for that field. And the Gemara says, "My avonim shein litzarcha." What does it mean, avonim shein litzarcha? And the Gemara says, "Hacha targimu." Here they explain it to mean as follows: Avnei diachva. And the Rashbam explains, Avnei diachva la'achar shekatzru ha'omrim. After they cut the sheaves, manichan osan liyavshan, they place them in order to dry them. Umanichan aleim avonim, and they place stones on top of those sheaves. That's what it means, Avnei diachva, the stones that are placed on the sheaves. Kedei shelo yefazrim haruach, in order that the wind does not scatter them. That's the explanation over here, meaning over here in Bavel. Ula Amar Ula says, Avonim hasturos legeder. It means to say stones that are arranged for a fence. That's the idea that they're going to be used for this property. The Rashbam says, Hasduros besoch hasada. They're arranged in the field, lasos geder lasad, in order to make a fence for that field. And the Gemara continues, Vatani Rabbi Chia, but didn't Rabbi Chia teach Avonim tzeburos legeder? He didn't say the word seduros, he said the word tzevuros. The Rashbam says tzevuros means v'afagav de'enan seduros, meaning they're piled up to make a fence, but they're not arranged. Chashavlu tashmish kavua desadr limacharimo. That's considered to be that it has a fixed, permanent use of the field, and it should be sold along with it. That's what Rabbi Chia seems to say. It doesn't actually need to be arranged, and it's still considered to be part of the field and part of the sale. And the Gemara says, Tani seduros, you should really, the way that it should be learned, according to Rabbi Chia, is not the word sevuros, but really the word seduros. And the Gemara now continues and explains, Hacha targimu. Here they explain Avnei de'achva. It's the stones that are used for the sheaves. And the Gemara clarifies, Rabbi Meir de Mesakron. According to Rabbi Meir, when we talk about these stones for the sheaves, they're Mesakron, meaning they're fixed for this purpose. Afagav de lo machson, even though they're not placed down. And the Rabbanon hu de machson. According to Rabbanon, they have to actually be placed down. And the Rashbam explains, Hacha targimu avnei de'achva ke'ein omar mar. The Gemara over here is doing what's similar to what we find when the Gemara does an omar mar, the master said, meaning hadr lamilse. They're going back to what we just said, lefrushe, to explain what we just said above. So we just said above, avnei de'achva, now we're explaining it. Aliva de Rabbi Meir, v'aliva de Rabbanon. We're explaining how Rabbi Meir will understand that, and how the Rabbanon will understand that. And the Rashbam continues and explains, Rabbi Meir, which Rabbi Meir are we talking about? The Amar Parak HaMocher Sasvina. This is Rabbi Meir later on, in Parak HaMocher Sasvina, he says, Machar Kerim, Machar Tashmishe Kerim. Rabbi Meir says that if a person sells a vineyard, you also sell the utensils of the vineyard. V'shaminon da'asa lefluga ad Rabbanon. We see over there that he's arguing, meaning Rabbi Meir is arguing on the Rabbanon. Ulameimer, Rabbi Meir is coming to say, Diafilu osin tashmishin she'enon nimkarin l'Rabbanon. Even certain utensils which are not sold with the vineyard, according to the Rabbanon, im hakerem, they're not sold together with the vineyard. De lo kvi kol kach, that they're not so established for use in the vineyard. Rabbi Meir mechurnein, even though according to the Rabbanon those are not sold, Rabbi Meir says no, those are sold together with the vineyard. V'hilkach bechol tashmishe kerem v'sadeh. Therefore, anytime you're talking about things that are used with a vineyard or with a field, hashnuyin b'mishnaseinu, which are taught in any of our mishnayos over here, but inan lefrushe, we have to explain. Hechi damin Rabbi Meir to Rabbi Meir machor ul Rabbanon eino machor. What would be a scenario where according to Meir it would be sold and according to the Rabbanon it would not? V'hilkach Rabbi Meir, and so therefore according to Rabbi Meir, hani avnei de'achva, these avnei de'achva, the stones of the sheaves, mechurnein bechlal sada, they will be sold along with the field. Kevan de misukanos umizumanos letzorach ha'omrim. Once they're fixed and they're set up for the sheaves, v'afagav de lo machson, even though they're not placed, meaning she'enan munachos besoch hasada, meaning even if they're not placed within the field, but they're set up to be used for the field, that's good enough according to Rabbi Meir. Elachutz l'sad, even if they're just outside of the field, Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir will say. That's what he means when he says machar kol tashmishe kerem, that all of the different things that are used for the vineyard, that's the whole idea. Even things that are not placed inside are included. Since they were set up for use in that field. And the Rabbanon, according to the Rabbanon, the Amri lo machar kol tashmishe kerem, who say that not everything that's used for the vineyard is included. Only things that are really designated for use in the vineyard. So then they have to actually be placed in the field according to the Rabbanon. And a similar kind of thing when we're talking about the stones that are arranged for the fence. According to Ula, who says we're talking about stones that are arranged for the fence, he must be going according to the Rabbanan in general, to Rabbi Meir, lo ba'inan sturos. According to the Rabbi Meir, you wouldn't need it to be arranged. As long as they're fixed up, as long as they are designated for a fence of this field, that would be good enough according to Rabbi Meir. Only the Rabbanan would say that it has to actually be arranged, and that's why Rabbi Meir says, Afagav delo sidram, even though they weren't arranged, zu al gav zu, even though they weren't arranged one on top of the other, the v'chlal kol tashmish kerem hu l'Rabbanan lo mizdavni ad sidran lakach dahainu ma'isa gadol, because again, according to the Rabbanan, it has to really be arranged. Betashmish kavu, it has to be a very established use, and again, according to Rabbi Meir doesn't go that far. He includes even other items within the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'yasakonim shebekerem shein litzarcho." Also, the reeds that are in the vineyard that are used for the vineyard, those are also included in the sale. And the Gemara says, "Konim maya v'detayu." What is the use of the reeds in the vineyard? How are they used in a vineyard? Amri devei Rabbi Yanai. They say in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, "Konim hamechulakin." They would split the top of these reeds. Shemamidim tachas agafonim. They would put the reeds under the vines. Essentially, they supported the vines. And the Gemara again clarifies within both Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. The Rabbi Meir to according to Rabbi Meir, it would be good enough if they were smoothed out and prepared, even though they were not stuck into the ground. The Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, they would only be included in the sale. Mukman, they're only included in the sale if they're actually placed in the ground. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also the produce that's attached to the ground, that's also included in the sale. The Gemara says, even though it's time to cut it, even though it's time to harvest it, but if it's still attached to the ground, it is included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also the cluster of reeds, if it's smaller than a beis rova, smaller than that size, so then we say it's insignificant and it is included in the sale of the field. And the Gemara says, even though it's thick, so you might think it is considered significant and independent, we say no, since it's less than a beis rova, it is included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also the watch station, which is not plastered with clay, that's also included in the sale of the field because it's not considered significant on its own. And the Gemara says, even though it's not fixed in the ground, it's not attached to the ground, it's movable still. Even though it's movable, it is included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also the carob tree, which is not grafted, which essentially means it's a young carob tree, that's also included in the sale. The young sycamore tree, that's also included in the sale. And the Gemara says, even though those are thick, even if they're large, but still, if it's Eino Murkov, if it's a Besulas HaShikma, a young sycamore tree, again, it is included in the sale of the field. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, if a person sells a field, it's not included in the sale, the stones that are not going to be used for the field. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Meir de lo Mesaknan. According to Rabbi Meir, we're talking here about stones that are not ready for use. The Rabbanan de lo Machsan, according to the Rabbanan, we're talking about stones that are not actually in the field. Again, those are not sold along with the field. And according to Ula, who says that these stones that we're talking about in the Mishnah are stones that are made for a fence, again, according to the first explanation, we're talking about stones that are used to weigh down the sheaves. According to Ula, who says we're talking about stones that are arranged for the fence. Rabbi Meir de lo Masaknon, according to Rabbi Meir, we're talking about stones that are not yet ready for use, again, for that fence. That's why they're not included in the sale. And Rabbanan de lo Sidron, according to the Rabbanan, we're talking about stones that were not arranged for that purpose. And again, that's why they're not included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also not included in the sale is the reeds in the vineyard that are not used for the vineyard. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Meir de lo Mashafian, according to Rabbi Meir, we're talking about reeds that have not yet been smoothed out, so they're not included. The Rabbanan de lo Mukwan, according to the Rabbanan, they're not in their proper place, and that's why they're not included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also not included in the sale is the produce which is detached from the ground. And the Gemara says, even though it still needs the ground, in other words, it's still drying out, but still, since it's detached from the ground, it's not included in the sale. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, also not included in the sale is the cluster of reeds, which is a beis rova, since it's that large, therefore it's considered significant on its own, and it's not included within the sale of the field. And the Gemara says, even though we're talking about reeds that are small, still, since they take up a beis rova, therefore they're considered significant on their own. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Yochanan says, this is not only true by the cluster of reeds, aruga ketana shel besamim, even if you're talking about a bed of spices, a small area of the field over here that's used for these besamim, v'yesh la shem b'fnei atzma, if it has its own name, if it's considered an independent part of the field, ein anim keresim, it's not going to be sold together with the field. And the Gemara continues and explains, Amar Papa says, v'hu dekaru la varda de plani, that would be, for example, if they're called the roses of so-and-so, meaning to say, again, they have a separate, distinct name, then they would not be included, or that area would not be included within the sale of the field. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, v'lo hashomeira ha'asuya b'tit, also the watch station, which is plastered with clay, that's not included in the sale because it's considered significant on its own. And the Gemara says, v'afagav de mechabra bi'ar, even though it's attached to the ground, again, still, since it is significant, it is not included within the sale. And the Gemara continues, and we'll read the parentheses, even though some take it out. V'lo escharav hamurka v'lo sadan hashikma, also not included in the sale is the carob tree that is grafted and the sycamore tree that is more developed. And the Gemara says, v'afagav diktini, even though they're small, but again, since they are more developed, they're considered significant on their own, and they are not included in the sale. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rebbe Lazar asks, Malbenos shel psachim, the door frames. Now this question has to do with a sale of houses. Mahu, what's the halacha? Is the door frame considered included in the sale of the house? And the Gemara says, Heichad de mechabri betin, if the cases where they're attached with clay, so then lo tiboylach, then it's not a question, damechuber, because again it's attached. If it's attached to the house, it's certainly going to be included in the sale. Ki tiboylach, when is it a question? The nikita besich, if the way they're attached is just with some wooden pegs, what would be the halacha? In that case, would it be included in the sale or not? And the Gemara says, Teiku, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Zeir asks, Malbenos shel chalonos ma'u, what if you have frames by a window? A similar kind of question. Is that included in the sale of the house? Mi amrinon lenoi bi'almahu da'avidi, do we just say that it's just there to make it look nicer? O dilmar maybe kaven de mechabri, since it's attached and it's included in the sale. And the Gemara says, Teiku, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, Malbenos shel kare hamita, if you have the malbenos, which essentially is underneath the legs of the bed, they would have something placed there so that the moisture wouldn't damage the legs of the bed. So what's the halach? Is that included in the sale of the house? And the Gemara explains, now if these stands are moved together with the bed, so lo tiboylach, so then it's not a question. It's movable, it's not part of the house, it's not included in the sale of the house. Ki tiboylach, when is it a question? If these things are not moved, what's the halacha? Then is it included in the sale of the house? And the Gemara says, Teiku, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, V'lo escharav hamurkav, also not included in the sale is the more developed carob tree, the grafted carob tree, V'lo sadan hashikmor, the more developed sycamore tree. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Tes Amid Beis.